On April 5, 1980, a sunny Saturday before Easter, the nuns at the Church of a Charitable Hospital in Toledo, Ohio, began preparing for the ceremony scheduled for the following day. From early morning, everything was arranged in order. At 8:20 in the morning, after finishing the daily prayer, Sister Madeline planned to go to the sacristy to discuss the evening service with Father Zero. When she arrived, she noticed the sacristy door was locked. This was highly unusual, especially during the busiest period before a major religious celebration, when the room was typically left open. Puzzled, Madeline used her key to unlock the door. Inside the dimly lit space, a horrifying scene unfolded before her. The eldest nun of the church, Margaret, lay motionless on the floor, without clothing. Years later, Madeline would still shudder at the memory. Margaret's body was positioned unnaturally, her arms stretched wide, her limbs rigid, her eyes bloodshot. A white altar cloth had been wrapped around her. Beneath her body, someone had placed a crucifix. The arrangement evoked the image of a dark ritual carried out within the sacred walls of a church. Unlike many criminal cases that take years to solve, this one was resolved with shocking speed. Only minutes after the body was discovered, and even before the police formally arrived at the scene, the suspect had already been restrained and taken into custody. Margaret, whose full name was Margaret Anpan, was born in a small village in the city of Adon, Ecuador. Her father was a carpenter with modest income who had to provide for 8 children. Raised in a devout Catholic family, 2 of her sisters joined a local charitable convent. Influenced by this environment, Margaret decided early in life to devote herself to religious service and remain unmarried. She excelled academically in her youth, earning a master's degree in literature from a university. She later obtained a nursing certificate and worked at a local church-affiliated hospital. In 1971, at the age of 62, she reached retirement age. However, due to her years of dedication, the hospital administration urged her to remain and appointed her as the church manager. Colleagues described Margaret as gentle and kind. Her only controversial trait was her strict adherence to traditional rituals. She insisted that every detail of the liturgy be performed precisely and without deviation. Tension arose when Father Zero Robinson was assigned to the church. He was 30 years younger than Margaret and had served there for 3 decades less. However, because he had graduated from an accredited theological academy, his official position ranked higher than hers. Margaret's frequent reminders irritated Zero. He often raised his voice, taking advantage of her advanced age and declining hearing and memory to issue harsh commands. His behavior deeply hurt her. On April 4, 1980, one day before the tragedy, Zero ended the Mass early, without consulting anyone. After the service, Margaret confronted him to question his decision. Zero remained silent throughout the exchange, staring at her coldly before turning away without a word. Although he did not shout as he had on previous occasions, his attitude left her devastated. According to a sister who managed church maintenance, Margaret was extremely upset that evening. She held the sister's hand and tearfully asked why the priest had shortened the ritual without discussion. In truth, the 2 women were not close and rarely spoke to each other. However, seeing Margaret's heartbreak, the sister could not hold back her own tears. Unsure how to comfort her, she could only quietly watch Margaret walk away in sorrow. On the day the incident occurred, although Margaret felt disoriented and deeply disappointed, there were no visible signs of distress. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. She followed her usual routine, waking at 5:30 in the morning, putting on her traditional nun's habit, and leaving her quarters as she did every day. Around 6 o'clock that morning, someone saw her in the church dining hall and exchanged a few words with her. That day was also Margaret's 67th birthday, yet She showed no intention of marking the occasion. Her breakfast was simple: a small bowl of oatmeal with raisins and a cup of coffee. After eating only a few bites, she left. At 6:50 in the morning, she headed toward the church. Less than half an hour later, she would be found dead. At 7:30 that same morning, a witness reported hearing hurried footsteps coming from the second floor of the church. The steps were heavy and forceful. According to the gatekeeper, Wattel Langston, it sounded as if something serious was happening. Based on accounts from several nuns, the footsteps appeared to come from the direction of Father Zero's quarters. Someone was seen moving quickly along the western corridor with unusual haste, creating a sense of unease among those nearby. Not long afterward, Sister Margaret was discovered lifeless in the sacristy. As the primary suspect, Father Zero naturally became the central focus of the police investigation. During a search of his room, officers found a dagger bearing dark red stains. The marks were consistent with evidence collected at the crime scene. Within days, Zero was arrested on suspicion of murder. However, in the face of the accusations, Zero firmly denied everything. He even claimed that after the incident, someone had entered the church confessional and admitted to killing Sister Margaret. When police asked him to describe the supposed confessor, he became flustered and ultimately admitted that he had fabricated the story. It might seem that at this point, Zero would have no choice but to confess. In reality, as the case neared what appeared to be its conclusion, a series of unexpected developments unfolded. Zero had been born into a Polish immigrant family. Within immigrant communities in the United States at that time, Polish Catholics were widely known for their deep devotion. As a result, Father Zero held significant credibility and respect within the local Polish community. After his arrest, many members of that community expressed outrage and publicly defended him. Toledo itself was a city with a strong religious atmosphere. A notable portion of the local law enforcement community were also devout Catholics. The deputy police chief overseeing the investigation believed Zero was innocent for a simple reason. He viewed Zero as a man chosen by God and recognized by the Pope, and therefore incapable of committing such a crime. More significantly, at that time, there existed an unwritten rule within parts of the American criminal justice system. If a priest was arrested on suspicion of a crime, law enforcement was not to proceed as usual, but instead notify the local diocesan bishop to handle the matter under canon law. Though difficult to believe, after evidence had been gathered, the deputy chief ordered investigative work suspended and related files withdrawn. Soon afterward, the Archbishop of the Toledo Diocese personally arrived at the police department. An officer, named Bill, disturbed by the situation, asked accompanying clergy where they were taking the suspect. He was told that Zero would be transferred to a psychiatric hospital. From that point on, Bill never saw him again. Public information later revealed that Zero had not been sent to a psychiatric institution. Instead, he was removed from his position, but remained affiliated with the local diocese. After several years living within the Polish community, he was eventually appointed as a part-time chaplain at a private nursing facility. Years later, Officer Bill learned that on the day of the arrest, the deputy chief had personally escorted the Archbishop to the station and even brought a professional attorney to confront the police department. In an interview, Bill expressed anger and confusion over why a senior official would protect a suspect in a murder case. Minor infractions might be overlooked, he said, but this was homicide. As these events surfaced, deeper questions emerged. At first glance, the case appeared rooted in personal conflict. Yet, one unresolved issue remained. Why had Margaret's body been arranged in a manner resembling a blasphemous ritual? And why had the diocese moved so swiftly to shield Zero? The arrangement at the scene bore similarities to what is commonly referred to as a black mass. In occult traditions, this ritual is described as a deliberate inversion of Catholic liturgy, historically associated with anti-religious symbolism and alleged satanic devotion. Within such narratives, the ceremony is intended to mock sacred rites and seek forbidden power. During the late 1980s, as allegations of clergy misconduct surfaced across the United States, organizations advocating for survivors of abuse began to form. One such group included a Toledo resident named Anna Lewis, who publicly spoke about trauma she said she endured as a child involving members of the clergy. She described being surrounded by robed figures and taken to isolated locations, including a cemetery. These accounts intensified public suspicion, though they also contributed to broader moral panic during that era. The case of Sister Margaret thus became entangled not only in questions of personal guilt or innocence, but also in institutional authority, religious loyalty, and the fear of hidden abuses operating behind closed doors. Later, Anna recounted that a priest dressed in a black robe locked her inside a coffin and placed insects inside, telling her they would turn her into Satan. After the ritual ended, another priest allegedly lifted her onto a table and committed inhumane acts, while others chanted hymns praising Satan. Much of Anna's childhood memory was fragmented, but as she grew older, she began to interpret what she believed she had experienced. By that time, she and her family were deeply entangled in a group she referred to as the Dark Reincarnation Organization, in which she claimed Father Zero was an important member. In the year 2003, after Anna publicly accused clergy of abuse, the long-forgotten case of Sister Margaret resurfaced. Although Anna had no prior knowledge of Margaret's death, she posed a striking question to investigators: whether the wounds on Margaret's body had formed the shape of an inverted cross. Police initially had no clear answer. They re-examined the altar cloth that had been wrapped around Margaret and discovered 18 symmetrical cuts connected in a pattern resembling an inverted cross. In April of the year 2004, Zero was arrested again. A search of his residence revealed hundreds of photographs of various individuals. Most were taken years earlier, but at least one had been captured within the previous year, raising suspicion that Margaret might not have been the only victim and that a broader network could exist. Before investigators could proceed further, events echoed those of years earlier. The local diocese applied pressure on authorities, and members of the Polish community organized large demonstrations demanding Zero's release. Despite police insisting that the arrest followed legal procedure, public unrest continued. With financial contributions from supporters, Zero was released on bail once more, causing national controversy. As evidence mounted, investigators exhumed Margaret's remains and consulted forensic specialists to reconstruct the scene. After reviewing original files and conducting analysis, a forensic expert concluded that around 7 in the morning on the day of the crime, Zero had entered the chapel area ahead of Margaret. Passing the altar, he took a tablecloth. While she was praying, he allegedly attacked her from behind and used the cloth to strangle her until she stopped breathing. The analysis suggested that Margaret did not resist, likely due to her advanced age and limited physical strength. On April 24, 2006, after extensive preparation, the trial officially began. Staff members from the Toledo Charitable Hospital Chapel attended, including Officer Bill, who had investigated the case years earlier. Zero's defense team was supported by members of the diocese, individuals from the Polish community, and even former officers who had once shielded him. Despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution presented substantial evidence. When arguments shifted to motive, the defense claimed that Zero, a priest with stable income and social standing, had no reason to commit murder and suggested investigative bias. The prosecution countered with witness testimony, placing Zero near the chapel at the time of the crime, and outlined 3 possible motives: long-standing conflict with Margaret, resentment over stalled advancement within the church hierarchy, and growing frustration with parishioners and religious duties. On May 11, 2006, the jury unanimously found Zero guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Throughout the proceedings, he had remained composed, but at sentencing, his expression reportedly shifted to despair. Footage later circulated showing him being escorted by police, head lowered, murmuring religious pleas. Although the conviction closed the legal chapter, many questions remained unanswered: whether a larger organization existed, who else might have been involved, and whether additional victims were ever identified. This case became only the second in United States history in which a Catholic priest was convicted of murder. Decades earlier, in 1916, a priest named Hans Schmidt had been executed, marking the first such instance. In May of 2014, Zero Robinson suffered a severe heart attack and was transferred to a medical facility operated by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction in Columbus, Ohio. On July 4, 2014, he died, bringing to an end a life marked by controversy and crime. That concludes today's case. Share your thoughts in the comments to join the discussion, and remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next classic case.